Hello and welcome everyone to the Casting Colosseum day number 2. If you were with us on Friday, you saw our first inaugural Casting Colosseum where we had our gladiators versus our competitors. And on that day, the Motivation and Bosma Par all defeating their opponents. So gladiators are undefeated going into day 2 action of the Casting Colosseum. And we have a great matchup for you today with our gladiator Sithos versus ThrawnOmega. Let's take a look at Sithos' background. He hails from Arizona in the good old US of A. He's 27 years old, and his play style is considered to be control. His tournament history, he's placed well in tournaments, but he's definitely looking to make his mark on the tournament scene. And a funny fact about Sithos, he's a PC and hardware junkie and obsessed with technical specs and builds. You can find Sithos streaming on twitch.tv/Sithos and also on the official Hex TCG stream on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. PST. And let's take a look at the deck that Sithos is playing today. It's the Wild Diamond deck, a very popular deck recently because this is the deck that Satalution won the IQ number 12. And look at his troops in the deck, playing 2 Charge Colossus, 4 Arborean Rootfather, 3 Balthazar, 4 Crocosaurs, 4 Angel of Dawns, 4 Eternal Sages, 2 Succulent Cuckodons, 3 Puck the Dreambringer, 3 Howling Brave will round out all his troops. And as far as actions, playing 4 Chlorophilia, 2 Pride's Fall, 2 Shard Calls, and his resource pool also includes 4 Shards of Life. He is playing the champion Rutherford Banks, which has a starting health pool of 23 and requires a double diamond threshold to pay 7. Put target troop from your crypt into play. Dino, break down this deck.
Sure thing. So, Sithos, fantastic streamer in our community, might need no introduction to many, but this deck might. It's relative newcomer to the meta. As Snake alluded to, we had its first appearance when Satalution used it to win our 12th IQ. So it's been on the scene for a comparatively short amount of time. However, it has some elements that we have seen before. You might notice the heavy resource base and ramping in the form of Chlorophilia, Howling Brave, and Puck the Dreambringer. It has almost, you might say, a Cressida shell. The big difference, of course, being that diamond tech. And, I'd say that there are 2 or 3 innovations. The first is health gain. Between Balthazar and Arborean Rootfather, often gemmed with life drain, it becomes very difficult for many typical control style decks to overcome that much health advantage. It just keeps ratcheting up that timer and makes the control deck have to work that much harder to take out an opponent who is running a deck like this. Second, you have the Charge Colossus and Rutherford Banks combo. This is a major innovation because outside of, say, void effects or transform effects, dinglers and the like, you're going to see that Charge Colossus come back again and again and again, and it's just very, very difficult to remove off the board. Notably, for anybody who's not familiar with the combo, Rutherford Banks with 7 charges can bring a troop back from the crypt and put it into play. Charge Colossus, when it comes into play, gives you 8 charges. And so you might see how this becomes a infinite cycle. As long as you can get the Charge Colossus out somehow, well, it's going to stay. And then third, the final innovation is the use of Shard Call and Eternal Sage for some pretty interesting shenanigans. You can wipe the board with a little bit of Ruby. You can exhaust troops that need to be exhausted. You can give buffs that need to be buffed. It's very flexible, and that flexibility, I think, was one of the reasons why we saw a flawless victory in Satalution. It was a 0-loss run in our last IQ.
So great deck here being piloted by Sithos. Let's take a look at our competitor. ThrawnOmega hails from Winterfell, aka Minnesota, USA. He is 29 years old. His playstyle is, he says control is for wimps, and he's all about the beatdown. So awesome stuff there. Tournament history, he once won a set 1 draft with a mono wild Briar Legion Dream. So awesome stuff for ThrawnOmega. Funny fact for him, he's a massive Star Wars fan with over 100 novels and is an Xbox Live addict with a 250,000 gamer score. So great stuff there for ThrawnOmega. Let's take a look at the deck he is piloting today. It's called the Glorious Elven Empire. Troops in his deck, he's playing 4 Arborean Rootfathers, 4 Tempestuous Blade Dancers, 3 Ashwood Blade Masters, 4 Wild Root Dancers, 4 Ageless Troubadours, and 3 Emberleaf Duelists. As far as actions in the deck, playing 4 Crackling Bolts, 4 Burns, 4 Wild Growths, and 3 Smash to the Grounds. Champion for Thrawn's deck is Mightsinger Elendria, which has a starting health of 21, requires 2 Wild Threshold, pay 5 to create a Giganosaur, and put it into your hand. This is a very powerful aggro deck. Dino, break it down for us.
Sure. So, one of the major innovations that we saw with the release of set 3 was a big focus on tribal, and elves were a part of that tribal edition. We saw prismatic cards, our very first prismatic cards, so things like Tempestuous Blade Dancer came onto the scene. And this is the kind of deck that is built from this relatively new tech. Ageless Troubadour lets you ramp up very high. In some ways, the deck shares ramp elements with the deck that Sithos is running. However, its focus is a bit more on the immediacy. As I said, controls for imps. It's all about the beatdown, so we have some differences of philosophy here. And this deck tries to deliver that beatdown very quickly. Ashwood Blade Master, I think, would be a key card in the deck, as it allows you to give all elves that you control +1 attack for 3 resources. And since all of the troops outside of an Arborean Rootfather are indeed elves, that is a strong way to make the most of your lower drops. Finally, I might add that Ageless Troubadour, which not only can be buffed by the Ashwood Blade Master, but also serves as the ever-critical ramp, as it gives you a temporary resource at the beginning of your turn for each elf that you control. It's a great way to get those Blade Dancers out, Tempestuous Blade Dancers out faster, or their Arborean Rootfathers for the win.
All right, so that is Thrawn's deck. We're going to go ahead and start our matchup with Sithos versus ThrawnOmega, and opening hands for Sithos is Double Wild Shard, Pride's Fall, Charge Colossus, Double Croc, and Puck Dreamer. Starting hand for ThrawnOmega is a Ruby and Wild Shard, Smash to the Ground, 2 Crackling Bolts, Arborean Rootfather, and an Emberleaf Duelist. A Ruby Shard is the play for ThrawnOmega, and he'll pass the turn back over to Sithos.
An interesting keep by Sithos here. He's really relying on a Puck the Dreambringer. It's a nice starting hand if you can keep the puck on the field. One of the advantages that a sort of beat-down style deck that Thrawn is playing is that it often has a lot of supplementary actions, things that can kill early ramp, like Crackling Bolt or Burn and the like, and we'll likely see this happening right here.
So Puck is the play for Sithos, and a Burn at the end of his turn. Before the end of his turn, we'll get rid of Puck, and start of Thrawn's turn is a draw. He gets a Smash to the Ground. We'll play a Wild Shard, Ruby, and a Wild Threshold. We'll play an Emberleaf Duelist and pass the turn.
So as whenever you have sort of aggro, beat down style things versus control, it's very often a race against time. On Thrawn's side, he's going to want to build up critical mass on his board, swing in, and deal as much damage as possible.
Wow. So Arborean Rootfather was the draw for Sithos, decided to put it back in his deck to draw a card, and drew an Angel of Dawn with no Diamond Threshold. Pass the turn back over to Thrawn. Thrawn, who recycles his own Arborean Rootfather, will play a Ruby Shard. Emberleaf Duelist on the board will swing in for 2. That'll bring Sithos down to 21.
On the other side, Sithos here stuck at 2. He really needs to get up. If he can get a Crocosaur out on the board, or otherwise have the pressure, stabilization is the name of the game for control. That the early game is where you will make or break your victory.
No resource for Sithos will drop down a Howling Brave, and it looks like ThrawnOmega is going to use a Burn, and that will remove the Howling Brave. Sithos will be forced to pass the turn.
Yeah, it's such a great play by Thrawn, because again, anybody who is at the level of our competitors here today knows that you stop the early ramp and capitalize on your board. Sithos has nothing. Everything he plays, all the ramp dies. He's going to critically need a couple more resources before he can even get anything out of his hand.
So a Wild Shard played for Thrawn, swinging with the Emberleaf Duelist. Will use Smash to the Ground. That'll bring Sithos down to 15 health and pass the turn. Sithos' draw is a Wild Shard, so there's a resource he needs. It's not a diamond, though. but he's at 3 resources, 4 threshold, but nothing you can play. He'll have to pass the turn back over to Thrawn.
But every resource is one step closer. I think a very critical turn will be the next one for Sithos. Does he draw that shard? Because if he does, we're going to see a 4/4 blocker on the field that also has the advantage of gaining 4 health, giving Sithos just that little bit of buffer that he needs to stay in this game.
Wild Shard for ThrawnOmega swings in with the Duelist, will smash to the ground for 5 extra damage, bringing Sithos down to 8 health. And he's going to go and use that champion power to put a Gigantosaur in his hand, pass the turn over to Sithos, who draws a Shard of Savagery.
Oh, what a tease. He needs that resource now. Thrawn is presenting lethal in hand. Is this going to be the end?
Turn will pass over to Thrawn. He draws an Ashwood Blade Master. He's going to be swinging in with that Duelist. That's going to be 2 damage. That'll bring Sithos down to 6 health. And in range of those 2 crackling bolts against him, which will be game, Thrawn is going to cast the first one. And Sithos is just sitting here with nothing to do, unfortunately. Second crackling bolt is going to bring Sithos down to 0 health, and ThrawnOmega takes game 1 here in the Casting Colosseum. Let's go ahead and take a look at Sithos reserves. What are some options for him?
I would say Carnosaurus is an incredibly easy pick here. Carnosaurus, of course, 2/2 for 2. When it comes into play, you have the option of having it battle another troop. And when you battle said troop, you also get to gain 2 health. So it's a great anti-aggro tech, very, very impactful for some of these early aggression style things. Plus, it would give him some of those 2 drops, which, as we saw, he really needed in this last matchup. On Sithos' side as well, I would perhaps consider a Crash of Beasts or 2. You can remove some of your late drops, perhaps Arborean Rootfather, but also potentially your 5 drops like some of your Sages, and put in Crash of Beasts. And that's a great way to build up card advantage over time. Of course, with escalation, Crash of Beasts will generate first 1 Rhino, then 2, then 3. And so every one you play lets you get a little bit more of a advantage on the board.
All right, let's take a look at Thrawn's reserves, playing 4 Crocosaurs, 3 Nature Rains, 4 Turbulence, and 4 Vandalize. What reserves should he side in, if any?
Well, I would say it depends on how well he knows the matchup and Sithos' deck in general. I could see Nature's Reigns being very useful against some of those artifact decks, things like the Charged Colossus, things like your Eternal Sages. Turbulence is particularly useful against your Angels of Dawns, but I think Crocosaur is maybe the most versatile, as the Angels come out. The Crocosaur can come out and eat 2 things at once, and I think most items in Sithos' deck are targetable by the Crocosaur and will actually die to it outside of the large 8/8s.
All right, we're going down into game number 2, where ThrawnOmega is up a game against Sithos, 1-0. Sithos will have the option to play, and we'll take a look at both players' opening hands.
Yeah, I think the big thing is some of the sideboard tech for Sithos that might help change the momentum back into his favor, and also some of those hands. He kept a slightly risky hand last time. He needs to be more conservative and make sure he can get his troops on the board.
Opening hand for Sithos is a Shard of Life, Shard of Savagery, Wild Resource, Chlorophilia, Crocosaur, Puck the Dreambringer, and Eternal Sage. He will play that Shard of Life for a Diamond Threshold and pass a turn.
Pretty strong opening for Thrawn as well. Actually, I like the opening hands for both. Now, Thrawn here being a little bit risky, does need to draw into a shard. He has 2 turns to do it, but if he wants to keep the same pressure he did last game, he will need that 3rd shard on turn 3.
Draw for Sithos is a Crocosaur. We'll play a Wild Resource sitting on a Wild and Diamond Threshold. We'll play Chlorophilia. We'll gain that double Wild Threshold and pass the turn back over to ThrawnOmega. His draw is a Turbulence, so he sided in Turbulence. We'll play a Wild Shard, sitting at 2 resources, single Wild, a single Ruby Threshold, and cycle they were born in Rootfather gets a Ruby Shard.
He did the ruby shot. That's so incredibly important. That'll give him the momentum he needs to keep pushing this game forward. On the flip side, Sithos also having 3 wild threshold makes sure he can play the Crocosaurs that he has in hand.
Wild resource is played for Sithos. Puck the Dreambringer will join the board. Sithos will pass the turn back over to ThrawnOmega.
This is again sort of the early game. Puck is almost superfluous at this point because Sithos does have those 5 resources in hand that'll let him play, with a slight delay, the Sage, the Crocosaur, whatever. And once those get on the board, they're going to stick. They're hard to remove.
Crackling Bolt will remove Puck, and Thrawn will pass the turn back over to Sithos. Draws an Angel of Dawn. It will join the party for free due to its ability. Just requires a single diamond threshold, and it can be played if it's the first card that's played off the top of your deck.
And one of the powerhouses from set 1. I mean, this is one of the so-called money cards, along with Vampire King. Just great tech. We've seen it all the way through set 1, set 2, and now the set 3 meta.
Unfortunately for Sithos, Thrawn does have Turbulence in hand. So Thrawn sitting at 2 wild, 2 ruby threshold, 4 resources in hand, trying to decide his play.
And so, if he plays the Turbulence, he cannot play anything else with only four resources open. So how afraid is he of 4 damage?
He is apparently afraid enough to use that Turbulence. The Angel of Dawn will visit the crypt. Turn passes back over to Sithos. His draw is a Shard Call.
Great pickup. Can take pretty much whatever you like. It's the brilliance of the Shard Call. You can save it for, say, a Ruby if you want to do some mass board wiping. You can exhaust things with Sapphire. Ooh, looks like Sapphire might be the pick. Or if he goes with Wild, it's a buff. So very flexible card.
So he's going to go ahead and play a Shard of Savagery. Gets that Ruby threshold. Sitting at 3 open resources, but nothing to play. We'll pass the turn back over to ThrawnOmega. His draw. It's a Wild Growth.
And likely see either the Ageless Troubadour, if he wants to go for ramp and get out more things faster, the Troubadour is the way to go. If you want to start buffing things up, though, the Wild Root Dancer is a strong choice.
He is the play for ThrawnOmega is an Ageless Troubadour. And we'll pass the turn back over to Sithos. His draw is a Shard of Life.
With nothing to kill, I imagine a Eternal Sage is the play. And indeed, there it comes.
Eternal Sage will hit the board. Sithos will play the Shard of Life. We'll have a choice between a diamond and a wild threshold. Chooses diamond. Sitting at 6 resources, 1 ruby threshold, double diamond, and triple wild. Turn passes back over to ThrawnOmega. His draw is another Wild Root Dancer, 5 open resources.
Now, Wild Root Dancers are fun cards because they're incredibly powerful, but they're only as powerful as the resources you have. If you don't have a drop, it's not going to do you any good. And this is actually a very critical moment for the overall flow of the game. If Thrawn decides to play a troop, he is risking the Crocosaur. And as we know, Sithos has 2 of those in hand.
Wild Root Dancer is the play for ThrawnOmega. He may try to swing in with the Troubadour. Decides not to, will pass the turn.
And even with a Wild Growth, Crocosaur will be able to take out both of those troops. So this could be a huge blowout for Thrawn.
Draw for Sithos is his 3rd Crocosaur in the deck. He attempts to play it. ThrawnOmega in response is going to Wild Growth, the Wild Root Dancer. And Sithos is going to remove both troops and lose his Crocosaur in the process.
Yeah, I think that's making the best of a bad situation. If you're going to have things eaten by a Crocosaur, you might as well make sure it chokes on them.
Sithos will swing in for 5. That'll bring ThrawnOmega down to 16 health. And Sithos looking at his crypt for possible troops to bring back with Rutherford Banks. Draw for ThrawnOmega is a Wild Shard.
Difficult choices, most certainly.
Sithos definitely has answers in hand with still 2 Crocosaurs remaining. ThrawnOmega trying to get some value out of his hand. Will play a Wild Root Dancer, 1 open resource. Still hasn't played a shard.
It's kind of the danger of Wild Root Dancer as tech, particularly in this meta where Crocosaur is so incredibly prevalent. Wild Root Dancer cannot crucially buff itself with those shard buffs, so you need a secondary troop, which makes it just prime real estate for the Crocosaur to come in and say, hey, lunch.
Draw for Sithos is a Shard of Life. We go to attack phase. He's going to swing in for 5 against Thrawn. If this hits, this will bring Thrawn down to 11 health, and it does. Sithos will play that Shard of Life, have a choice between a diamond and a wild resource. Or threshold, we'll choose diamond.
And every diamond does give Sithos another 4 health, and that's actually really bad for anybody who's trying to do an aggro style victory. As I've said before, health is your timer. It is the thing that your buffer between life and death.
Draw for Thrawn is a wild resource. We'll play the Ashwood Blade Master, play a resource to pump up the Blade Master. It's now a 4/3 Swift Striker. And Champion Power will put a Gigantosaur in Thrawn's hand. We go to attack phase.
And buffing up his troops is pretty much the best line of play for Thrawn because, again, that health total is getting bigger and bigger, and it's just more turns he has to overcome the infinite stream of Crocosaurs, the infinite stream of things like Arborean Rootfather.
Rootfather is the draw for Sithos. Does have his Champion Power, which you can activate. Can play the Arborean Rootfather, and he does. So the Rootfather will join the Eternal Sage on Sithos' side.
Oh, that is rough. And, at an 8/8 body, it can overcome the 7/7 Gigantosaur.
Looks like he's going to use that. Looks like he used that champion ability to bring back the Crocosaur into play, which will battle the Wild Root Dancer and the Ashwood Blade Master. Looks like Thrawn is going to power up one of his troops with Smash to the ground for 2. So that's a 6/5 Ashwood Blade Master. Both troops are removed. Crocosaur goes to the crypt.
I think that was perhaps a slight misplay on Thrawn's part. The battling crucially doesn't take into account things like Swift Strike, which is perhaps Thrawn's reasoning there. They both die regardless, and with 4 attack on the Blade Dancer and 2 on his Root Dancer, it would have killed the Crocosaur anyway.
Eternal Sage before the end of Sithos turns bring Thrawn down to 6. 6 resources open for Thrawn. We'll play a Tempestuous Blade Dancer. And let's see what Thrawn decides to do. Doesn't do anything. We'll pass the turn back over the Sithos. His draws in another Eternal Sage.
This is where things get dicey. I think Thrawn really needs some way to stabilize. He does have Root Fathers of his own, and if it's socketed with damage, that potentially is one way for him to begin to shift things around. But it looks like it's the beginning of the end.
Sithos swinging in with just the Arborean Rootfather, a block from the Tempestuous Blade Dancer, and Sithos will pass a turn back over to Thrawn. Draw for Thrawn is another Ashwood Blade Master. We'll play that out. Three resources remaining. We'll play a Emberleaf Duelist, and we'll pass the turn.
And this, with Crocosaur in hand, Sithos needs multiple blockers, but at the same time, it just opens you up for the Crocosaur noms. I think this is going to be the GG. Full swing from Sithos would be my guess.
Draw from Sithos is a Howling Brave. It will go into the field, trigger both Eternal Sages. So 2 8/8 Eternal Sages. That Ruby Shard will also do 1 damage to all troops on the board, which he is going to play that.
Yeah, even better.
And he's going to be swinging in with 3 8/8s, 2 Eternal Sages, and Arborean Rootfather. 24 damage, nothing Thrawn can do. And Sithos ties this matchup 1-1 against ThrawnOmega. And very, very good comeback for Sithos in this matchup. Any other reserve changes you think Sithos should consider here?
Well, first off, I want to say that was a really exciting turnaround, and it's still anybody's game. One more match, this one will decide our winner, and who will win a Leeching Burrower one of those rare PvE cards. As far as sideboarding is concerned, Carnosaurus, I think, is still one of the best bets. Crash of Beasts a second, but not quite as good as the Carnosaurus. I think that stall and health gain is great, especially if you're already running Crocosaur, because it's been any dinosaur battles, any troop, I think, even battles. So a great way to just pad your health total.
Yeah, and I think Cerebral Domination could be an option too, to prevent some of those combat tricks from buffing up his troops. Could be a card he might consider siding in. Let's take a look at ThrawnOmega's sideboard or reserve again, and he did side in or reserve in those turbulences during that first matchup.
Yeah, I think more than just the sideboarding, it depends on what he's taking out, because turbulence is only an answer to one troop, the Angels. Nothing else in the deck actually has flying that I can remember off the top of my head. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Adam, but without another target for turbulence, it's perhaps a weaker choice than something like Nature's Range, which has multiple targets, or I would argue for Crocosaur, as Crocosaur can take care of pretty much anything in Sithos's deck outside of another Crocosaur. So it's pretty versatile.
All right, so indeed, yes, the only troop in Sithos deck is that has flight is Angel of Dawn. So let's go ahead and get up to game number 3 for both these players. The winner will walk away with a draft pack. So if the player wins, he wins a draft pack as well as a Leeching Burrower. Sithos definitely wanted to make sure that the Gladiators stay undefeated. Thrawn will have the option to go first, and we'll take a look at opening hands for both players.
Going first is a strong position to be in if you're aggro, so we might see a lot of pressure coming at Sithos.
Sithos opening hand is a Diamond Shard, double wild, Shard Call, and 3 Puck Dreambringers in his hand. On the opposite side for ThrawnOmega is double wild, Burn, Wild Growth, an Arborian Rootfather, a Tempestuous Blade Dancer, and an Emberleaf Duelist.
This is a pretty tense moment. Both players have hands that are suboptimal. We may see some mulligans happening.
Thrawn does indeed mulligan, now has a Ruby, Wild Shard, Turbulence, Burn, Wild Growth, and Smash to the ground. Decides to keep that hand. We'll play a Ruby Shard and pass the turn.
An interesting keep on Sithos' side. I mean, Puck the Dreambringer is unique, so you can only ever play one of them. Perhaps he's hoping to draw into some of his major threats and get them out quickly because, you know, his previous pucks were all killed. So maybe he hopes to have some backups.
So Sithos will play out a Diamond Shard and Shard Call, and will pass the turn back over to Thrawn, who draws a Wild Road Dancer. We'll play a Wild Shard sitting at 2 resources, single Wild, single Ruby Threshold, and pass the turn.
Wild Road Dancer isn't a bad pick.
Soul Marble is the top deck for Sithos. We'll play a Wild Shard. It's going to ramp up with Chlorophylla. We'll play another Wild Shard. He's now up to 3 resources, 1 open, double Wild Threshold, and a single diamond. Pass the turn back over to Thrawn. His draw is a second Burn.
Well, the ramp there actually is a pretty solid play by Sithos. It'll allow him to play both the Soul Marble and the Puck, the Dreambringer, next turn, making the best use of his resources.
Draw for Sithos is a Shard Call. We'll play a Wild Resource. Soul Marble comes online. 2 open resources remaining for Sithos. Looks like he's going to Shard Call for Sapphire. So now he has single Sapphire, single Diamond, and triple Wild.
Interesting. So perhaps just not even wanting to play any troops until he has protection.
Ruby Shard is the play for Thrawn. 3 open resources, and we'll pass the turn. Before the end of his turn, Sithos will pump up the Soul Marble with 1 counter. Draw for Sithos. It's an Angel of Dawn.
Oh.
So an Angel of Dawn is now live on the board for Sithos, but probably not for much longer.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where siding in those turbulences, even if you only have 1 target, you know, the Angel of Dawn is such an impactful card. Maybe it's worth it. And here we're probably going to see the Angel swatted down very quickly.
Sithos plays a Sapphire Shard. Before the end of his turn, Turbulence will swat down the Angel of Dawn, put it into the crypt. Turn passes back over to Thrawn, who draws a Tempestuous Blade Dancer, still stuck on 3 resources.
This is where it becomes, you know, fixing is so incredibly important in a multi-shard deck. And, I think one of the strengths of the deck that Sithos is running is that it is so flexible when it comes to shards. I mean, we see it looks like he's playing a 5-shard deck.
Before the end of Thrawn's turn, the Soul Marbles pumped up to 6. Sithos now is going to pump it up to 10 and have the option between Soul Armaments and Soul Cavalry. Looks like he is going to go for Soul Armaments. Play out a Wild Shard.
Soul Armaments is, I think, about 70% of the time the popular pick, as it does protect all of your troops. I am actually a pretty big fan of the Soul Cavalry. I think there are definitely times where that's the correct answer. But, you can't beat a 4/4 with Steadfast and Spell Shield.
Absolutely. Puck the Dreambringer is the play for Sithos. He has tapped out on resources. And now Thrawn deciding to use a burn directly to Sithos. Second burn now going to be activated. That is going to bring Sithos down to 19 health before Sithos actually even gets into combat phase. He'll end the turn, pass a turn, back over to ThrawnOmega. His draw, it's a Crackling Bolt.
These top decks are not in Thrawn's favor. He needs that second wild, and more importantly, he needs any resources at all. If he can get the Tempestuous Blade Dancer out, he has some way to stop the aggression from Puck. Saving grace is that Sithos only has other Pucks in his hand, which are indeed unique and cannot be played. But we're still looking at 8 damage coming Thrawn's way.
Wow, and an Angel of Dawn play at the start of Sithos' turn. So a 6/6 Steadfast Spell Shield Angel of Dawn is on the board. Sithos does have his champion ability where he can bring back a troop from his crypt into play. It's going to swing in with Puck. That'll bring Thrawn down to 17.
Actually, while he does have the 7 charges, he cannot use his ability. I think he didn't account for the second diamond threshold that is required. So
that's true, yes.
Sapphire and Ruby might have been a little bit wasteful.
Crocosaur is the draw for Thrawn, but unfortunately unable to play it due to resources and threshold, and will have to pass the turn back over to Sithos. Draw for Sithos is a Shard of Life.
Oh, there he goes.
There's that diamond threshold.
Easy fix.
Champion Power is online. Going to swing with both. That's 10 damage from the Puck and the Angel of Dawn. That'll bring Thrawn down to 7 health. Champion Power will activate, and an Angel of Dawn will join on Sithos' side.
Yep, joining her sister. And this is such a commanding position on Sithos' side. Thrawn is going to need some miracles, like, hey, second wild. That's a first step.
It's a first step, but I think it's a little late for that, as a Wild Root Dancer will be in play for Thrawn. 1 resource remaining, and the turn will pass back over to Sithos, who's sitting with 2 Angel of Dawns and a Puck on the board. Draw for Sithos is a Diamond Shard.
Yeah, without some way to block flyers in the air, our third game will be going to Sithos, it looks like.
So swinging in with just the Angels, that's 12 damage inbound to Thrawn 7. No way to block. And this matchup is all but over. Thrawn looking at wild growthing his Wild Root Dancer up to 5. Sithos will crack in for 12. And that'll do it. Sithos continues the reign of the Gladiators, taking this matchup 2-1 against Thrawn and continuing the legacy of the Gladiators. Thrawn will walk away with a set 3 booster pack. So congratulations to our competitors. And congratulations to Sithos for keeping the Gladiator dream alive.
And GG, it was well played, I think, on both sides. We had some great back and forth, and it's hard choices all around when it comes to those hands, what to keep, what not to keep. I think this is one of those skills that many people don't appreciate, but mulliganing in the beginning of the game is such a critical part. Knowing your deck so well that you know what kinds of hands are worth keeping versus what kinds of hands you absolutely must toss as an essential skill if you want to be successful on the competitive scene.